Welcome to Behind the Line, the podcast where you'll get untold stories from first responders and military veterans. I'm Tim Hegman. I'll be your host. My guest today began his law enforcement career in 1994 with the Austin Police Department as a police officer. In 1999, he was promoted to detective, where he was assigned to the Missing Persons Unit. 4 years later, he was transferred to the Homicide Unit, where he worked until his retirement in October of this year. During his time investigating homicides, he was the lead investigator in 68 homicide cases, solving all but 4 of them. In addition to those 68 cases, he assisted with another 700 cases. According to the most recent FBI Uniform Crime Report, an average of 61% of homicide cases nationwide are solved. Today's guest retired with a solve rate of 94% of cases where he was the lead investigator. That is truly an impressive statistic. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the godfather of the Homicide Unit, David Fugitt. David, welcome to the Behind the Line podcast.
Thank you, Tim, for having me. It's a great honor.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy, so thank you. I want to say that before we go on, the godfather of the Homicide Unit is something that your colleagues refer to you as. Were you aware of that?
I was not until fairly recently.
But before today, you learned about it, right?
Yes, I have.
Yes, so the godfather of the Homicide Unit. That's quite the title. So you've raised the bar for future homicide investigators for sure. Well, congratulations on a distinguished career in law enforcement, and welcome to the world of retirement.
Yeah, thank you.
But as we both know, you're not retired anymore. 4 weeks after retirement of a long career with the Austin Police Department, you're now, you have new employment. And what exactly is that?
So I actually work with the Prosecutorial Assist Unit with the Texas Attorney General's Office.
Wow. Very nice. So it was a short-lived retirement, but back to work, and I'm sure they need people like you to help them out. So congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I want to thank you because I'm here in Austin. You may not realize this, but because of you. And let me just back up. I wanted to Jake, who produces this, is out this way, lives out this way now. And I said, hey, if I come out to Austin, would that be okay? We could do some interviews? And he said, oh, absolutely. So I went on to LinkedIn, and literally there was a notification of an Austin homicide investigator who just retired. I'm like, well, that's interesting. I'm thinking about going to Austin. Let me look into this. I did, and then reached out to you, and you were kind enough to respond back to somebody who you've never met. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said before, it's my honor.
All right. Well, good. Appreciate that very much. We're going to get into your career, and we're going to get into a few cases that you were involved in. Obviously, the statistics that I read there, that's a lot of homicide cases as an assistant, but also those 68 that you were the lead investigator on. But before we get there, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where'd you grow up, family, just as a kid? What'd you end up doing?
Okay. Well, I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Army, and so he, every few years, was stationed in different locations. So we kind of bounced around the United States. And then in my teens, I actually lived in Germany for a few years. Although I wish I was a little bit older at the time. I think I'd appreciated the history much more than I did.
Oh, yeah.
But when I graduated from high school, my father was restationed to Carswell Air Force Base. And so I started taking criminal justice courses at the local junior college during the day, and actually dispatched for the local police department in the evening.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I wasn't old enough to be a police officer yet. I was just turning 19.
Right.
So I dispatched to kind of get my foot in the door and, get an ear for the radio.
Well, good deal. And do you have siblings, or do you have any hobbies that you enjoy?
I do. I've got 4 brothers, and I live in Austin, which is known as the live music capital of the world.
Yes.
So my wife and I definitely like to attend concerts.
Oh, nice.
Music venues on our off time.
Oh, very nice. I didn't know that about you, about being a dispatcher. And it's interesting because I've never been a dispatcher. But I remember when I was a field training officer, when I was working patrol, I would tell every trainee, there's one person you never want to upset. that's the dispatcher. Yeah. Always be kind to the dispatcher.
Yeah, I mean, they take great care of us. And really, when you look at the success of our homicide cases, it's not just one individual. I mean, obviously, it's a team effort, but the dispatchers play a significant role, and they're worth their weight in gold to us, because the information they're relaying certainly helps start us on the right foot when we're working these cases.
Yeah, a lot of times the dispatchers are the unsung heroes.
They truly are.
They really are. They don't get the credit they deserve in so many ways.
I could not agree more.
Yes, sir. So you talked about junior college, taking criminal justice classes. Before that, did you always want to be a law enforcement officer, or did you think maybe something else and then became a law enforcement officer?
So initially, I thought about the military, which was the route that my father had taken, my uncle, my brother, all in the Army. But I really aspired to be a police officer. I had a deep sense of duty to serve. And I think that was my calling. I wanted to get into investigations. And as with any officer, when you come out of the police academy, you initially start out on a patrol position, which I did in Southwest Austin. And that's why I took the promotional exam at first opportunity, so I could get in and start working some investigations.
Well, and what about homicide? Is that something you're like, okay, eventually I want to be a homicide investigator, or did you become a police officer and then see what they did and went, okay, that's for me?
When I was working in the Juvenile Missing Persons Unit, I had opportunities to work with the Homicide Unit on several cases that they had, so we kind of worked them jointly. And interestingly enough, my mother is a hospice nurse. So she works with individuals that are end of life, and she's always taught me that we should treat end of life as we do, the beginning of life, with the same dignity and care. And I've always just kind of had that fascination and work ethic. Wanted to do everything that I could or within my ability to try to bring justice to these families, who have lost a loved one. Although I cannot change the circumstances of what happened to them. At least I can try to do that.
Well, that's honorable of you in thinking that way. But a little bit off script here, but based on what you just said, I mean, that's amazing. Your parents, your father, military, serving this country, so much respect for the military. And then for your mom being the hospice nurse, man, that can be a difficult job, but it's a job that is one that is needed and very much appreciated. But people who have not experienced that don't know, but that takes a special person.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about it.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had two great role models.
I did. I certainly did.
Yes, sir.
Very, very fortunate.
Yes. All right. So you're an officer, then you work the missing persons unit. You see what, as a missing person unit investigator, what homicide does, because you work some cases together. You saw that interest, and what does it take to become a homicide investigator? I mean, is there a test for it? Do you have to be hand selected? Do you put an interest into it? What does it take?
So we really don't have a cookie cutter way of getting into the homicide unit. I was told that if that was the eventual destination, that I should work in crimes against persons. Yep. So the police department typically is broken up, CID-wise, into two divisions. You have crimes against property and then crimes against persons. And so while I was in the Juvenile Missing Persons Unit, my first major investigation was the case of missing American atheist Madeline Murray O'Hare. She ended up using her son to have prayer removed from school back in the 60s. Well, she had an office, a headquarters here in Austin, and she and her son and her granddaughter, who she adopted as her daughter, ended up going missing back in 1995. And so for many years, that case was unsolved. It was thought that they had possibly had absconded. And while I was working that investigation, I was assigned as lead. I worked hand in hand with the FBI and the IRS, and it was determined that her office manager, David Roland Waters, was a key person of interest. So I worked with them on that case to the point that we ended up executing a search warrant at his residence in March of 1999. We found some ammunition, placed him in jail, and through the course of interviewing those around him, we had found out that he, in fact, with the help of two other individuals, had kidnapped the O'Hares and had held them for ransom outside of San Antonio for $600,000 in gold coins.
Oh, wow.
And eventually they ended up killing them and burying them on a ranch outside of San Antonio. So as while I was working on that case, that I had quite a bit of involvement with not only APD Homicide Unit, but working with the federal agencies as well. And it was an eye-opening experience, to say the least. Brand new investigator, still wet behind the ears, but having that opportunity certainly set me off on the right footing.
Wow. Yeah. So what a case to be. That was your first case as a lead?
First major investigation as lead, yes.
And how nervous were you as the lead on such a huge case?
Sure. I mean, just as when I entered the homicide unit too, it can be a daunting task. I wonder, am I really up for this? Because we shoulder quite a bit of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I think more so than people probably realize. I think we put more stress on ourselves than the police department or even the citizens at large. As you had mentioned, I had 68 homicides lead investigator, and I had 4 that were unsolved, and I worked on those up until my very last day at the Austin Police Department. But those 4 are the ones that I thought about all the time.
Yeah.
I just wish that I was able to bring those families the justice that they deserve.
Yeah, I'm sure of that. And maybe we can touch on that briefly in a little bit,
Sure.
About those 4 cases. So let me ask, was there a key piece of evidence before he was this suspect, the guy responsible for killing the 3? What was the key piece of evidence in that case, or was it just an admission once you executed the search warrant?
We ended up identifying a female that was very close to him and conducted an interview of her. And through the course of that interview, she was able to provide us with information that confirmed for us that he, in fact, was responsible for killing Madeline Murray O'Hare.
Wow. Okay. And then that led to the search warrant, or
led to the search warrant, and as well as the storage unit. So he held them at ransom for this gold, and only $500,000 in gold had shown up. They were waiting for the other $100,000, and when it didn't arrive, they ended up killing them and dismembering them. Well, David Roland Waters took that $500,000 in gold coins and placed it in a suitcase and hid it in a storage unit in Austin. Well, there were some individuals that broke into that storage unit and ended up stealing that suitcase with all the gold in it.
$500,000.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And what about, you and I talked briefly before we went on live here. Yeah. There was the incident with the bomb, the serial bomb maker, or the bomb cases in Austin. How about that? Can you go into some detail on that case, or all those different cases, and how what ended up as a result?
Sure. So in March of 2018, we had the Austin serial bomber. And we didn't know there was going to be a serial bombing at the time. Obviously, it's just like in a serial killer case. You don't know until you have a subsequent case. So we had the initial bombing. It was at the residence of Anthony House, where he had picked up a package that was on his front stoop, and the bomb exploded. And unfortunately, he was killed as a result. And we're trying to determine who had placed the bomb there and what the reasoning was. Initially, we thought that maybe it was a case of mistaken identity, because there was another residence down the street, and the houses were very similar to one another. But it was not long after that we had another bombing that had occurred. And at that point, we realized that there's much more to this than we had initially thought. We reached out to the FBI and the ATF, and thankfully, they had sent numerous agents. We had, I think, over 600 agents fly into Austin to help us with that investigation. Not only that, but we had 2 planes that were dedicated to us to fly evidence back and forth to Washington, D.C. each day to have tested.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a major investigation, involved multiple agencies. Austin Police Department, we had it as a lead investigator, but the FBI and the IRS. And going through each one of these scenes, we were able to identify components of the bombs and go basically brick and mortar stores, determine potentially where these components had been purchased from. And it was through the course of that we were able to identify the serial bomber as being Mark Anthony Condit.
Interesting.
So we started tracking his phone. We knew what vehicle he was driving at the time. And over the course of 19 to 20 days, we ended up catching up with him. And we found out that he was in a parking lot up in Round Rock. So as we were approaching him in his vehicle, he pulled out, got on the frontage road. We had the SWAT team ram his vehicle. And at that point, he had placed a pipe bomb to his chest and he detonated himself.
Wow. And do you remember how old he was?
I believe he was in his early 20s at the time.
And was there a connection between him and how many victims were there besides just
so we had the two that were killed, Draylon Mason and Anthony House, and then we had others that were significantly injured. We had a female that ended up losing a leg, and then we had two others that were bicyclists that ran over a tripwire, and they sustained shrapnel injuries, but thankfully they lived.
Was there a connection to any of these people to him, the suspect, or he just was doing it?
Yeah, that was the thing, is we were trying to establish if there was any pattern. Yeah. So essentially at one point we had Chief Brian Manley get on the media and essentially send a message to him telling him, hey, we recognize what you're doing. We're trying to determine what you're wanting from us. And it was at that point in time that he then changed up his process for delivery. Instead of placing the packages on the porches, he then started mailing them.
Oh, interesting.
And that caused great concern for us, too. We actually had one that exploded at a FedEx facility, and then we had another where he had set it out basically off the sidewalk and had set up a tripwire. So he was changing his methods and his modes. And even after the point where he had detonated himself and committed suicide, we still had fear that there could be other bombs out there that were still going through the mail system that had yet to be delivered. So there were several days that had passed where we were particularly, anxious and worried that there could be others. And when you're working a case like that, we'd never seen anything like that. I mean, that was unprecedented. And obviously, you think about the Unabomber case and the fact that he went on for, 19 plus years.
Right.
So that weighed heavy on us as well. But this case in Austin, we were able to bring it to conclusion in 19, 20 days.
Wow. Okay. And with this guy, the suspect, did he have any criminal record?
No, he was very clean. He was
Really?
He was raised in a religious family, and that was the thing that was really unusual because I was part of the team that went to his family's house to tell them, in fact, that their son was the Austin serial bomber, and they had no idea. I mean, they had been watching the news just like everyone else had.
Wow.
So it was... say it was heartbreaking, to say the least.
Yeah.
And they essentially released a statement indicating, that they feel for all the families and, have questions themselves as to why their son decided to, take this turn and end up killing and harming individuals.
How old was he?
So Mark Anthony Condit, the serial bomber, was in his early 20s.
Early 20s, okay.
I believe it was early 20s.
That was early 20s, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, so that's interesting. No criminal record, living at home?
So he'd actually just recently moved out. So he was living with roommates at another location.
Oh, okay.
And so with the assistance of the FBI and the ATF, we executed a search warrant at his residence. And, we were fearful that there could be booby traps.
Sure.
But we found quite a bit of bomb-making material inside the residence. And the other roommates were unaware.
I was asked.
Yeah. When he comes and goes, he would lock his room. And, during the day, he'd watched news broadcasts about the bombings with his roommates, side by side, and they were none the wiser.
That is very interesting. Well, I mean, what goes on with somebody who has no criminal record, no background in, committing crime, and then to jump to bomb making and trying to kill random people?
Yeah, and he was very intelligent. I mean, we could tell that he was thinking it through, and the devices were becoming more and more complicated. We found a number of cell phones where we believed at some point he was intending to set these bombs off remotely.
Wow.
But just never reached that point.
Yeah, thank goodness. Okay, what about, we also talked about another case involving an officer who was shot and killed. Who was that, and what was the background of that case?
Yeah, so in 2012, we had senior Austin police officer Jaime Padron responded in late evening hours to a call at the Walmart. There was an individual inside the store that appeared to be intoxicated, that was placing items in a backpack, which we suspected he intended to steal. Other than that, there's nothing else that really stood out about that particular incident. Officer Padron arrived on scene spoke with management, and then they identified this particular individual. So as he approached the male, the suspect took off towards the exit door, and at that point, Officer Padron gave chase, ended up tackling him right there at the entrance, and a short struggle ensued, and the suspect, Brandon Daniel, produced a firearm and ended up shooting Officer Padron in the neck and killed him. And then the two managers at the Walmart that were on duty that witnessed this actually jumped in and put their own lives at risk and subdued the suspect until the police were able to arrive.
Wow, so you were able to, he was arrested that night?
He was arrested that night. I ended up doing the interrogation, and we went through a lengthy trial, and Brandon Daniel was given death penalty and was placed on death row. And just recently, we were informed that he ended up dying on death row, and we suspect that his death was likely the result of a suicide.
Wow. Okay. How do you know how many years the officer had been working before he was killed?
A handful of years. So prior to coming to Austin Police Department, he was in the Marine Corps and had worked for San Angelo Police Department outside of Austin. Very respected officer. Just to see the amount of support, not only internally from other police officers, but from the community when this occurred, was pretty overwhelming. As a lead investigator on that particular case, I had to go in my office, as I'm working, typing out this capital murder warrant. I had to close my blinds because my window overlooked the flagpole outside my window, and there are individuals that are coming up and placing teddy bears and flowers and candles at the base. And I had to close my blinds and just kind of shut that all out and focus on what I needed to do at hand. And, it's easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah. I can imagine, a coworker, a friend, who's killed, and you have the responsibility of, investigating that case, and then putting all the evidence together. It's coordinating everything, and you want to do it because it's your job. You are an investigator of homicides, yet this is your friend or a coworker, and maybe there's that extra, not to treat any cases differently, but
sure.
It's more personal,
It was, and it was particularly difficult. I go out there to the scene, and Jaime Padron, I can see him there at the scene. He's in the same uniform that I wore with the Austin Police Department. And even though the incident, for the most part, was captured on video, we still went through, and I had the mindset of processing it as though that video didn't exist. Right. So we did all the ballistics, we did all the DNA, line everything up, so we made sure that we, crossed all our T's and dotted all our I's.
And it worked out.
It worked out.
Prosecuted and put on death row?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a lot of cases that you assisted on, and those that you're the lead.
Yeah. Is
there one that, when it comes to an arrest of someone, that was and maybe one that you just talked about, and maybe another one, are there, say, one or two arrests through your investigation that, because of the evidence, your effort, your team effort, the effort of your team, led to the arrest of someone? One or two cases that are the most satisfying?
Well, there are several, but
and we can even more if you want. But something that you just like. Okay, let's stand out.
Well, as assigned to the homicide unit, I worked in current case homicide. There was a case where a Caucasian female in her 30s, Deborah Baker, was killed in Austin in 1988. And I was assigned at one point to be the lead investigator on that case. Through the course of that investigation, it had gone cold for a number of years, but we found out that it was tied to a case in Williamson County, north of Austin, and that the individual that was responsible for killing both women was in fact a serial killer. So in 1986, Christine Morton was killed in Williamson County. It was not an APD case. She was killed in Williamson County, and her husband, Michael Morton, was wrongfully convicted, and he served 25 years in prison, and he maintained his innocence throughout the entire process. There was a key piece of evidence in that case that was never tested. It was a bandana that had blood evidence on it, and the district attorney's office at that time in Williamson County fought because they didn't want it to be tested. But eventually a judge allowed that evidence to be processed. And when they did, they were able to determine that there was a mixture of DNA from an individual by the name of Mark Allen Norwood and Christine Morton on that bandana. And the Innocence Project started researching Mark Allen Norwood and determined that, in fact, 2 years later, 1988, he was living a block and a half away from Deborah Baker when she was killed in Austin. And there are a number of similarities between Christine Morton and Deborah Baker. You know, they're both white females in their 30s. They were killed in their beds, struck over the head with blunt objects, had property or articles that were placed over top of their heads. And then there was evidence that property had been stolen. So we went back, when I was assigned the case of Deborah Baker in Austin, went back and looked at the evidence that was collected back in 1988. Obviously, at that time, they didn't have the DNA testing that we have now, but they had conducted vacuuming of the comforter and of a bath towel, and were able to identify pubic hairs. So we looked at these 3 pubic hairs and were able to determine that there was a mutation in these hairs. We got a search warrant for Mark Allen Norwood Standard to compare the two. And in fact, he had the mutation in his hair. And at that time, the statistician told us that picking an individual at random with that same mutation in their hair would be equivalent to picking 1 out of 33 billion, which is the world population several times over.
Wow.
So we knew we were on the right track with that particular case. And we ended up charging him with both capital murders, capital murder of Christine Morton and the capital murder of Deborah Baker. And he was tried in both of those cases. I testified in both cases and, in essence, testified for the exoneration of Michael Morton, who was wrongfully convicted. And since that time, I've spoken to him on a number of occasions, and we actually did a documentary together for ID Discovery called Guilty Until Proven Innocent.
Wow. So 25 years.
25 years.
And how many years ago did he get out?
He got out in, I believe, 2011.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's got to be, like, satisfying that you were able to find the actual killer and then have somebody who, you know, maintained his innocence all those years to be released and then have a conversation with him and do a documentary together.
Yeah, and the contact that I had with the family, too. So Deborah Baker's daughter, you know, has been pushing all along to ensure that her mother's case, you know, didn't become a cold case. And I still maintain contact with her to this day. We actually went a couple months ago, we went out to lunch together, and I talked to her fairly frequently. So not only do I have my own, you know, my nuclear family,
right.
But the families of these homicide victims, you know, have lost loved ones, you know, in a sense have become extended families as well. And I had another case where a young female was killed by her boyfriend, and her mother would bake cookies or bake a cake and bring it to the Homicide Unit, you know, on the anniversary each year, you know,
wow.
to show her appreciation for all the work that we did in that case, you know, and it's very heartfelt.
Yeah, well, your work is being recognized, your team's work is being recognized, and just maintaining that relationship with those the family members of those victims, that just speaks volumes, you know, to you guys for seeking justice, you know, for their loved one.
Yeah, it's tough, you know. We go out there, although we can't change the circumstances of what occurred, but at least we can reach out to them. That's the most rewarding thing, I think, about the Homicide Unit, is being able to tell them that we've apprehended, you know, we're charging individuals responsible for killing their loved one, and do everything within our power to see that they get the justice they deserve, not only for the victim, but for the surviving families as well.
Yeah, definitely. Real quick, we talked about the DNA. You just mentioned DNA.
Yeah.
So, when you started in homicide, let's say the missing person unit, to the day you retired, how much has the collection of DNA benefited locating and leading to prosecuting someone? How much of a difference from just, and that's not many years.
Yeah, no, it's not. I can't overstate the significance of that,
right.
You know, because when I first started, In 1999, when I was working juvenile missing persons unit, we had to have a pretty substantial amount of blood in order to, at least develop a DNA profile. Prior to that, we were just doing classifications on blood types,
right,
AB, positive, negative. But we've evolved to the point now where we can get touch DNA. You got an individual that is a secretor and they touch an object. We can potentially get DNA off of that object. So when we go in and we're processing these crime scenes, we may collect hundreds of items. It's not easy to discern at that particular moment in time what's going to be probative material evidence or not. And I've always been of the mindset it's better to have and not need than need and not have.
Exactly right. Yeah. That's a great philosophy there, yes.
Yeah, so we'll go through and say we've got a homicide that occurred, in this room. It wouldn't be out of the question for us to spend 16, 17, 18 hours just processing this room, because you may only get one opportunity to get it right. Once you release that crime scene, then potentially it can become contaminated. So we'll go through, process this, and anything that potentially has DNA evidence, we'll determine whether we're going to swab it there at the scene, or we may end up collecting it and taking it back to the laboratory and processing it in a controlled environment. Let's say we got an individual that was involved in a stabbing, and it's a pretty bloody crime scene. There could be evidence where they cleaned up at the scene, so there could be touch DNA on the faucet, on the handles where they cleaned up there at the scene. So we may collect those items and take them back to a laboratory. But we still do not get DNA results back immediately.
Right, it takes some time,
technology, I think, eventually is going to get there. But we do kind of wait on pins and needles, to see what type of results we're going to get back and how probative it's going to be. Because in a good number of cases, DNA makes the case.
It makes the case. And it goes to that, oftentimes, maybe not with for some departments, the patrol officer may have equipment for touch DNA. Other times you have to call it CSI, but it goes a long way to collect that evidence and have it have items that may not lead to something other than, compared to, we don't need to touch that. We don't need to swab that. Yeah. And then realize, or not realize, but the potential of having evidence there that you've overlooked.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And this even goes beyond just the DNA evidence, too. When I first started in the Homicide Unit, we still had Polaroid cameras. That's right. Although they were commercially available, in 1986, right. If I'm at a crime scene, I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have the ability to take a picture of a murder weapon and show it to the investigators back at the Homicide Unit. So we'd take a picture of it with a Polaroid camera. Yep. And we'd have an officer drive the Polaroid back to the Homicide Unit so the other investigators could see the evidence as well. And, you see where we're at now, where not only can we capture images, but video of crime scenes. We're using drones now to help map crime scenes, which had been unthought of years ago.
Yeah, and so with all that said, so where, even before 99, but in 99, working the juvenile missing persons unit to the day you retired, so much has been, developed and to help. Do you have any idea, or do you go, don't worry, stand by, this is going to happen in 5 years? Do you have any ideas of what you think will happen?
I do. So actually, I think that we are eventually going to reach the point where we'll be able to map a crime scene so completely that they'll be able to recreate it in a hologram at trial.
Wow.
Because they've got these devices that can take photos, millions of photos of these crime scenes, and recreate them in a digital format. And I think it's down the road, but I think eventually they will be able to freeze that crime scene, as it is, and recreate that in a courtroom for jurors.
Wow, that's incredible. And when that happens, we'll look back and say, that not many years ago we were doing this, and that'd be.
It's true. And as a member of the Homicide Investigators of Texas and the International Homicide Investigators Association, and we'd get together every year. 1 year it may be in Austin or San Antonio or Houston, and we talk about a lot of the latest advances in homicide investigations. And it also afforded an opportunity for some of the smaller agencies that didn't necessarily have all the resources that we do to talk about some of their unsolved homicides. So collectively, you can have an entire conference full of homicide investigators from all over the state brainstorm to see if there's anything they can do to try to further their investigations. So that's rewarding as well.
Those committees or those those associations, even if it's a local one where a number of agencies in a local area, like where I worked, we had an area called the South Bay, and there were a number of small departments, and once a month you'd have your crimes against persons investigators get together, and they will talk about their cases, and they may help each other out or offer suggestions. And then you may have, property over here. You're getting a lot of thefts, whatever it is. But to have that, to put those brains together to help to solve your case, but to help others, it's incredible. It's a great network.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. And, fortunately, I've been offered the job by the Office of the Texas Attorney General, and now we'll be able to carry those experiences, training, and relationships that I've developed over the years to investigating cases around the state of Texas, complicated, high-profile homicide cases.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, let's get into a little bit more as an homicide investigator. Can you say what is the most difficult part of being a homicide investigator?
I would say probably trying to compartmentalize. When you're out there and I'm dealing with an individual that had just been killed, I try to approach it and look at it in the truest sense as a body of evidence. What can I glean from that body? Is there potential for DNA evidence underneath the fingernails? If there's hand-to-hand combat. Fingerprints we can get off of human skin now. Rather than looking at them as an individual who's eating, breathing, speaking, just minutes beforehand. That's more difficult than try, especially when it comes to cases involving small children.
Right.
You got children that are really just the truest innocent of the innocents. And adults on occasion will place themselves in risky behaviors. The cases that are involving young children are particularly tough.
Yeah, I can imagine just being the responding to a case as a patrol officer is one thing. It's difficult. And being the investigator and taking that case forward and really wanting to gather that evidence to locate the suspect.
Yeah, and I think one of the significant things, too, is that the homicide unit, after we work major investigations, we'll sit down and we'll debrief, and it kind of gives you an opportunity to talk about these cases with other individuals that experience the same. They've worked them as well. And my wife, she's been true rock. She's been there to support me. We've been married for 30 years now, and she's been with me throughout the course of my entire career. She knows my investigations probably forwards and backwards, and
I get it.
And being able to talk to her candidly, about these cases and, what my feelings are, and to have that support has made all the difference.
Yeah, it's always to have that, the better half, as a sounding board and someone who is there who is comforting and supportive. It goes a long way.
Oh, absolutely it does. I wouldn't have been able to do it without her.
Yeah, it goes a long way. So with that, how much stress is involved? I mean, you have stress as a patrol officer, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
But how much stress is involved as a homicide investigator?
A tremendous amount, Although I think that we probably work best when we're under that kind of stress.
Yeah.
Because in the first few hours of a homicide investigation, we're going to make hundreds of decisions that judges and attorneys are going to, argue about for years to come.
Sure. Yeah.
We don't have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, to say, well, I wish I'd have done this or I wish I'd have done that. Are there times that we make mistakes and wish that we had done something? Sure, absolutely.
Right.
I could probably go through every homicide investigation and pick something out I wish I had handled differently. But you learn from that, and I think over time, you kind of just put that in your mental Rolodex and you build upon it. And I think that in a large part has lent to the successes that we've enjoyed at the Austin Police Department. Consistently year in and year out, our solve rate is in the upper 80s, lower 90s. Back in 2005, we had 26 murders, and we solved all 26 that particular year. But in most years, we're pretty close.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So a lot of stress because you got a lot of weight, on you, and those decisions that you're making with the information you have available
Sure.
are going to be second guessed by people who are reading about it or hearing about it in a slow manner or whatever, and they're taking their time. So
yeah.
I can understand that stress that you were under many times. What about your hours? I mean, a lot of people work, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
Right.
They get there right at 9 o'clock, and they're clocking out right at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not the case.
Right. So how many hours did you, I know it probably fluctuate.
Sure.
But were you on call every other week? Were you on call once a month? How was that? And then how many hours do you think you, on an average, worked during a week?
So on paper, I worked a 5 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift, but the vast majority of our homicides occurred in the late hours, early morning hours. So we're just, as far as the on-call, it's pretty consistent. It's almost 24/7. Because even if you're not responding to a particular homicide scene, you're still available, if there's questions that are asked, or if somebody's needing help interviewing a witness, or executing or writing search warrants. At the Austin Police Department, we worked in a ladder rotation. So if you can kind of imagine the detective that's on the very top rung, essentially is in position to assume lead of the next homicide that occurs in Austin. And then the detective that's on the fourth or fifth rung down will be the primary support detective. So when that murder occurs, for all intent and purposes, the two of them will be married to that investigation from day one all the way through. And then just depending upon how complex the case is, everybody else in the office will assist with overseeing processing of the body at autopsy, interviewing witnesses, searching for video, which has been a major attribute to the homicide cases now, because we're seeing that more and more crimes are being captured on video footage. So that's definitely been an aid. And then that lead investigator, when they work that case, will drop to the bottom of the ladder, and everybody else will just kind of climb up one rung. But it's something that you have to be committed to 24/7.
Right.
Even when I'm not actively working on homicide investigations, I'm always thinking about the cases that I have, particularly the 4 cases,
Right.
of, what has been done, and trying to determine is there anything else I can do to try to further leads in those particular cases. So, it's not out of the question for me to wake up, in the middle of the night and think of something that I should try, so I'm making mental notes and going back and applying it to see if it'll help push us in the right direction.
You answered my question there. A question I was thinking about is, I was going to ask, do you have a partner that, you're married to all the time, or is it like you said, the rung, the ladder?
Yeah. So typically it'll rotate just depending upon where they're at on the board, because we have individuals that may be out on vacation or something like that.
Yeah.
If you're the lead investigator and you've got a major event coming up, an anniversary or something, another detective can step in, help cover you for that short time frame. Although I have had two wedding anniversaries where I had to send flowers to my wife from the crime scene.
Oh, wow.
So,
yeah.
That's, it's just kind of the nature of the beast.
Yeah. And, supportive spouse, your wife, she, from day one, has seen you grow through that department and take on this role, and just the importance of it.
Yeah.
So, again, very supportive. Are there any cases that just kind of haunt you, that you just, for whatever, one that you solved, or one that you haven't solved, but something that is just, it just haunts you for whatever reason, like you just think about it more than maybe some others?
So there is one I had fairly early on in my career. It was a case where this grandfather was essentially babysitting his granddaughter. I think she was about 4 years old at the time. And he had her in the backyard, and he was going to mow the yard, riding lawnmower. And she ran up to the lawnmower just as he started, and he placed her on his lap and made a lap around the yard. And then he sat her down on the patio with a drink, some iced tea or something along those lines, so he could finish mowing the yard. And once he started the mower back up, she actually darted out in front of the lawnmower, and he wasn't able to stop it in time, and essentially ran over her with the lawnmower. And that was a particularly tough scene. I had this grandfather that, I believe he was in his late 50s or 60s at that time, just absolutely crying like a baby. I mean, it was tough, and there was nothing that I could do to console him.
Right.
he flipped the lawnmower off and saw what the damage was. But every once in a while, I'll think about that particular case. As I said, the cases involving the young children, can be tough and weigh heavy on us.
You said you were a young investigator when that happened?
Yes.
And do you remember what year that was?
I want to say maybe 2004.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. And I mean, things just don't go away.
No, they don't. They don't, And there's some cases too. We have officer-involved shooting cases too, and I've interviewed officers that have been involved in those traumatic events. And there's some cases that we do talk about, and then as homicide investigators, there's some that we just don't.
Right.
Yeah. They're tough.
Yeah. I think it's important. And that's one of the reasons for this podcast, in general, all of our episodes, is to, give a voice, a platform to first responders, military veterans who do work. They're human just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And they do a job that is second guessed all the time by people who have no idea about what it takes to be a law enforcement officer in this case.
Yeah.
The struggles they go through based on what they experience, what they witness, what they investigate. And they just kind of dismiss it, I think, because they don't know.
Yeah, a lot of times I think their perception of what homicide investigations are gained from what they see on TV and the movies, and it's not sterile. Homicide investigations are gritty. Death has certain smells. Death has weight. And we have some homicide detectives, or we have detectives that are wanting to be homicide detectives, and we will typically have them come out and ride with us for a period, of a couple weeks, and we try to expose them to as many different death scenes as we can, because a good number of them realize that this is not what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it. I can tell you, you never imagine that you're going to have a call where an individual, places a shotgun in their mouth, and you have to go in there and, we're holding newspaper over top of our hair because we've got blood that's dripping down from the ceiling, or, an individual that was found deceased, in their home. They kind of lived like a hermit, and hadn't been heard from for several weeks, and the body's decomposed to the point where, newspapers have gathered in the front yard,
Mm-hmm.
and those scenes can be particularly tough too. The one thing that is different about the homicide unit than other units is that we investigate the cases from the very beginning all the way through. So when I get that initial page that a homicide had occurred, we're there from day one all the way through trial and beyond. Whereas in most cases, an officer will respond initially, write up an investigation, it'll go to the detective bureau, they'll do their work up on it, and then it'll go to an investigator at the district attorney's office, as they prepare it for trial. But we're involved in every step of the process all the way through. So there's a great deal of ownership that goes into those cases.
Yeah, there's just so much more than what people realize from what they watch on television. So much more. Your 4 cases that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Do you think eventually in time there's potential that they will be solved?
They do, and I hope so, more sooner than later. I can tell you that I don't believe there's any such thing as a perfect crime. I'm hoping at some point in these particular cases there'll be somebody that has information. They may get hemmed up on another charge and use this as leverage to get out. That was my desire, was to be able to clear those cases, and those 4 just unfortunately I wasn't able to do.
Do you remember what years those were?
Mm-hmm.
What years were those?
My very first unsolved murder was my very first investigation. As a homicide detective, I was assigned to a case where Abraham Macedo and his wife had a little mom and pop music store off of Manor Road. And they went to the store on a Friday night, late at night, close to 10 o'clock, because they were going to collect some CDs that they were going to sell at the flea market the following morning. And while they were inside the business, the wife heard the front door chime as somebody entered. And so she turned around to approach them, tell them, hey, the store's closed, when she was accosted by a young Hispanic male wearing a hoodie, bandana on. He brandished a firearm and demanded money. The other assailant approached the husband at the back of the store, and the husband, Abraham Macedo, latched onto this kid, and a struggle ensued. And the other assailant ran to his aid and ended up shooting Abraham Macedo, and they fled the scene. And the wife, over the years, I've gone back and looked at other robbery cases or other robberies that have been committed in that particular area with individuals around that same age, and I've shown them to the wife, and every single time I do, she blocks out everything but the eyes, because that's all that she was really able to see. So it's been a particularly tough case.
Yeah.
They didn't steal anything, so we don't have any DNA evidence on property that may have been left behind. It was a particularly bloody scene too, because he was shot multiple times. So if there was any DNA that was left behind by the assailant, it's quite possibly it was masked by blood.
Blood, yeah.
So that case, my very first one,
wow,
and that's when I really had to think hard. Am I cut out to do this? But I had encouragement from the supervisor of the unit, from the other detectives that said, stick with it. You can do this. And I said at that point, I'm never going to allow myself to have another unsolved homicide case. It weighed very heavy on me. And it went a number of years, up until 2016. That was
the next
second one? Yeah, in 2016. Wow. Yeah, I had a case off of Sweeney where Gerald Leron Williams was sitting in a chair outside of an apartment complex when an individual approached and shot him multiple times while he was seated in the chair, and then the suspect fled. And
that's it.
That's it. That's all I've got. I don't know what the motive was. Nothing was taken. As far as I know, there wasn't any type of struggle between the two of them. And I've exhausted all the avenues that I've known, at least up to this point in time, with social media and phone records, trying to determine if there was any leads in that particular case, and put out flyers in English and in Spanish, hoping eventually somebody somewhere is going to come forward with information that we need to solve that case. And, even on the anniversary of the homicide, I'll get with the local news media outlets, and we'll revisit the case, just hoping that it'll spark something in somebody's memory.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a particularly tough case. And then in 2017, I had a case involving Kevin Van White. He was an older Hispanic male, he was Caucasian male, that was living out of a U-Haul. And he had parked his U-Haul behind a business in the 500 block of Congress Avenue. And at some point in the early morning hours, somebody had approached that door and ended up shooting him multiple times. I suspect it could have possibly been a robbery that went bad, but we didn't have any leads to develop in that case either. And it's unfortunate as far as the homicide is concerned. It's not a matter of if, but when. And that particular time frame, we had a number of homicides that occurred. So it was not long after I was assigned the lead on that one that I was assigned as a support detective on another case. So you're constantly trying to reprioritize your cases,
sure.
And go back to them and revisit them when you can. And then my most recent one was a case off of North Lamar where Hugo Morales Martinez was in the parking lot, and he was shot and killed, and his vehicle was stolen. And again, we're trying to do everything we can in that particular case, putting out flyers, going door to door, just gumshoeing it. And see if there's anything to do.
Good old police work.
Beat the bushes, because sometimes those can help develop leads. And you've always got to think outside of the box. I know it's my very first homicide with Abraham Macedo. I was driving into Austin one day, and I saw a blank billboard off the side of the interstate. And I was wondering if we could use a billboard to advertise the reward money in that particular case. And so I reached out to the billboard company and explained to them what I was wanting to do. And they actually donated 10 billboards around the city for that very purpose. I just had to come up with the money to print the paper. So I went to the Greater Austin Crime Commission and told them what I was wanting to do, and they actually put up the money we needed to print the posters for those billboards. So we're able to get the community vested in those cases too, to try to help again further those cases. And Now, I hope it someday, one of these other detectives will be able to, bring that case to a conclusion for the families.
Yeah, well, those four, and when they do, it may be another detective who's working homicide who solved that case, but no doubt your investigative work up to that point is going to play a big part when they identify, locate, and arrest this person or these people.
Yeah, I think it certainly will. And we went back and preserved all the phone records, everything that we could do at that particular point in time. And so with my retirement, those are the four cases that probably weighed heaviest.
Well, hopefully they are all solved. Eventually, hopefully soon. It'll give you some relief as when that happens.
Yeah, I mean that's my greatest hope. And I don't necessarily believe there's anything such as closure for the families, but if I could at least bring them that,
sure,
I think it would help with the healing process.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we're going to wrap up here. Do you have anything you'd like to share or say, or any advice for somebody who's thinking about becoming considering being a homicide investigator?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you and your listeners. I mean, I think it's just a tremendous opportunity to put this out there. I mean, you've spoken to a number of guests of different backgrounds, and I think that's particularly fruitful and helpful. We've got new up-and-coming homicide detectives or investigators, that kind of gain some insight as to what we do. And I would strongly encourage any individual that's got an interest in getting into homicide investigations, to apply with the police department and get into a crimes versus persons unit where they can gain some experience conducting interviews, interrogations, crime scene reconstruction, evidence collection. Because in the very end, you kind of look at the totality of circumstances and you put all that together, and that's when you develop your best working theory as to what we think could happen. We move forward and take these cases to court. But I would take somebody that's got the will and the want over somebody that's got experience any day of the week, because a lot of what we do is on-the-job training.
Right.
You can learn that process, but you've got to have that desire. Because you're going to be investing a great amount of time. And you'd asked about hours earlier. It's not uncommon for us to work on a case, 33, 34 plus hours straight.
Right.
Until we, reach the fatigue or we hit that wall where there's just nothing else that we can do at that particular moment in time. And, we may have an hour or two where we can, shut down, take a power nap before we have to get up for the autopsy examination. So I've slept in my office many nights. I've slept in interview rooms too.
Oh yeah,
many nights. And other detectives have too. We've all shared that same lifestyle and commitment. My wife knows that when we have a homicide investigation, it's likely she's probably not going to see me for a few days.
Yeah.
Except for maybe on the news.
Right. Right. Exactly.
When she's watching the local news that evening. But it's a lot of heart and soul that goes into these cases. Yeah,
and it shows with what your solve rate is and the number of cases you've investigated. And it should be for any job, but for the homicide, you can't phone it in.
No.
You cannot phone it in. You have to take that deep dive and do what you just talked about. Mm-hmm. But there's no room for somebody who wants to be a homicide investigator to not want to work that day.
Yeah, no. And you're called at a moment's notice. As I said, it's not a matter of if, but just when. And, when that pager goes off at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, it's showtime. I mean, you got to really get yourself in that right frame of mind and that focus. And, as I'm driving to that crime scene, I'm listening to the radio, all the information that's being relayed. Information you have 1 minute may change the very next.
Yep.
But when I arrive on scene, I want to contact my primary support detective and compare notes, determine what's been done at that point. Is there anything else that we need to do, early on in the investigation to help bring it to a successful conclusion? So you're constantly just thinking about, those types of details.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, you're putting yourself in all different positions trying to figure out what happened and identify who did it. So, well, man, let me tell you, work in homicide is a job that, like you said, may not be for everybody. And it certainly seems like it was your calling, number one, to be a law enforcement officer, but to take that step to be the investigator of homicides. And you definitely called for this career. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate that. And I plan to continue that success into my new venture.
Yeah. I'm sure you will with Attorney General, for sure. But, so we'll wrap up here. And I just want to thank you for your service to the city of Austin, for investigating all those crimes, for the victims and for their families, and having such a distinguished career, and for serving in the law enforcement profession as a professional. So thank you so much for that. I wish you the best of luck with your new job.
Thank you.
I'm sure you're going to be awesome with that. Great. And for taking the time out today. Thank you for spending time with us on the Behind the Line podcast. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like the show, please follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the show notes from each episode, visit behindthelinepod.com. If you want to support the show and hear more from our first responders and military veterans, head over to patreon.com/behindtheline. I'll see you on the next one.